Hello everyone, it's Scott. We're back for day 9 of Aetherdrift previews. So we got a lot of interesting cards to talk about today, got a bunch of rares to talk about, and a few lower rarity ones that I think have some standard playability. But before we do, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Aetherdrift preview season and beyond. And if you're looking for cards from Aetherdrift or Innistrad Remastered, you can check us out on the web at caffeinatedgamers.tcgplayerpro.com to get all the new cards from the latest Magic sets. All right, let's dive into today's previews. So, all right, our first card of the day is Ovia, Auto Mech Artisan for 3 and a green mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human artificer. She's a 1/2. And each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample. And for a green mana, you can tap Ovia, and you may put a creature or a vehicle card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put an artifact onto the battlefield this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a card that truly could be very, very busted. I mean, giving any creatures you have trample is a great ability on its own. But for 1 mana, being able to put any creature or vehicle onto the battlefield, and if it's an artifact, giving it 2 +1/+1 counters, is pretty busted. The only downside I'm seeing with Ovia is it's a 1/2 creature, and because of that, that's going to make it more vulnerable to removal in Standard. But we've got so much black and white removal running around anyways. You know, pretty much any card seems to me to be pretty vulnerable to removal. But Ovia, if you can keep Ovia on the field, then after that first turn, you're going to be able to put a creature down every single turn from your hand for 1 mana, and that is an incredibly powerful ability. And I love the fact that all those attacking creatures get trample as well. So when she comes into play, everything now has trample. So if your opponent does have blockers, any excess damage is going to go to your opponent, and that'll shorten the clock on the game, and hopefully enough for you to win. So I expect to see Ovia in Standard for sure, given those strong abilities on the card. Next, we've got Sky Seer's Chariot for 1 and a white mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 3/3. It has flying, and as this vehicle enters the battlefield, choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate, and it crews for 2. So on the surface, I mean, it's a good card anyways, but the fact that you can not shut down the activated abilities of a particular creature or artifact or planeswalker, but you make it cost more mana now. And because it's more mana intensive, that means the opponent can't do quite as much. So I think this is definitely a sideboard card in Standard decks if we have a lot of planeswalkers, or we see a lot of decks that are using a significant number of activated abilities. And it might even be main deckable, just because incidentally you're likely to be able to name something that will allow you to make it more difficult for your opponent to play their game plan. So I would see a place for this in Standard. Whether it's sideboard, whether it's main deck, I think that's to be determined. Next, we've got Salvation Engine for 4 and a white mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 6/10. And other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. And whenever this vehicle attacks, return up to 1 target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it crews for 6. So it's got an incredibly high crew cost, so you're going to have it in a deck where you're going to be able to probably use multiple creatures to crew this. But once you do, and I can see this specifically in an artifact creature deck, because all of those artifacts get an additional +2/+2, so that makes a lot of sense for this. And under those circumstances, I can see this as a very solid Standard card, because every time you attack, you're getting something back from your graveyard and being able to put that onto the battlefield. If it's an as those those artifacts. You're probably building around the artifact theme in the Salvation Engine deck. So I like this card. I think it's very playable in Standard. And I think even in some of the older formats, this might be playable as well, because that ability to, in essence, recur everything from your graveyard that's an artifact. Obviously, it's once every turn you're going to be able to do this, but getting those key cards back from your graveyard is a very powerful ability in Standard and in other formats. Next, we've got Gastral Thrill Roller for 2 and a red mana. You get an artifact vehicle, that's a 4/2. When this vehicle enters the battlefield, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, and it crews for 2. And for 2 and a red mana, you can discard a card, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, activate only as a sorcery. I feel like this is one of the more interesting vehicles we've seen. 4/2, isn't nice power, but probably dies to a lot of stuff with only 2 toughness. But getting it on turn 3 and being able to immediately attack with it, I think that probably is going to make it good enough to see some Standard play, particularly if a vehicles deck does develop in Standard. And the fact that it immediately gets to become a creature when it enters the battlefield is, for me, is a selling point to get to use this. And then as the game progresses, you'll be able to continue to crew it with the low cost of 2. So I think this is going to have a home somewhere in Standard if a vehicle deck does develop. Next, we've got Web Strike Elite for 2 green mana. You get an Insect Archer. That's a 3/3 with reach. And it cycles for X and 2 green mana. And when you cycle this card, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment with mana value X. So Web Strike Elite, I think, is definitely absolutely Standard playable. It's a little bit cheaper than some of the other creatures that we've seen or that have this kind of ability on it. So I like that, and it's an overpowered creature, 2 mana for a 3/3, and it has the ability of reach on it. So I really like just the card in general. And then if you cycle it, you can go ahead and destroy an artifact or an enchantment. So it's a very flexible card in your deck to allow you to do kind of, hey, I need a creature right now. I can play it as a creature, or I can cycle it to destroy an artifact or enchantment that I need to get off the battlefield. Next, we've got Wax Shape Stealer for 3 and a blue mana. You get a creature that's a shapeshifter and a 0/0. It has flash. And you may have this creature enter as a copy of a creature or artifact you control, and you can cycle it for 2. So, nice, ability on it to be able to just become anything that you have on your side of the battlefield. The fact that it can be an artifact as well, I think, makes it interesting. And that cycle ability, we can't discount that. But we already have Mockingbird in Standard, and that is definitely seeing play. So I think this is kind of competing with that a little bit. And with Mockingbird, it's going to require potentially more mana, but potentially less mana as well. So I think, in the right kind of deck where you want to copy artifacts, then this is probably something that would be a decent card in that, but I'm not sold that this is something that we're going to see in Standard. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards for the day, and the first is Point the Way for a green mana. You get an enchantment with Start Your Engine, and then later you can pay 3 and a green mana and sacrifice this enchantment. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is your speed. Put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this is a very powerful enchantment. I think it definitely sees play in Standard, and it's a very easy way to get that Start Your Engine ability going for you, because obviously you play this on turn 1. and now you have, a speed of 1, and then on turn 4 or 5, or a little bit later, whenever you get to max speed, hey, then you sacrifice it and get 4 lands, and you're able to put those on the field once you've got 4 mana available. So this is, to me, a very, very playable uncommon that we'll see, I think, a bunch of standard play in any kind of deck that wants to have that start your engine ability. Next, we've got Broodheart Engine. For a black and a green mana, you get an artifact, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to scry 1. So it allows you to filter the top of your library. And then for 2, a black and a green mana, you can sacrifice this artifact and return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And you can activate this only as a sorcery. So I think this is definitely a card that's playable in Standard. We see Mazemind Tome. We've seen cards like that allow you to scry for 2 mana that are artifacts. See a lot of play in Standard over the years. And that added ability of being able to sacrifice and then get a creature or a vehicle back, I think is a solid enough benefit for you to go ahead and do this. And that surveillability on it is also very important because you can mill the top card of your deck into your graveyard if you want to. So if this is in a mill deck where you're trying to reanimate things, then I think this is a really outstanding card for those. I expected to see a lot of play in any deck that's kind of self-milling that wants to play stuff out of their graveyard. Next, we've got Bounce Off for a blue mana. You get an instant where you can return target creature or vehicle to its owner's hand. So this was going to see a good bit of Standard play. And the reason for it is that, right now the blue bounce spell, I mean, we do have Unsummon, but the blue bounce spells that we've got beyond that really only allow you to target your opponent's creatures with things. This allows you to protect one of your own creatures by being able to bounce it back to your hand or a vehicle in that way. So blue decks, this is a great protection spell in essence for them by being able to bounce stuff back to your hand. Next, we've got Wretched Doll for 1 and a black mana. You get an artifact creature. That's a toy. It's a 3/1. And for 1 black mana, you can tap it and surveil 1. So not a great ability on this at all. I don't think it's Standard playable. All right, next we've got Maximum Overdrive for 1 and a black mana. You get an instant, and you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. It's certainly a very good limited card to use, giving something Death Touch and then also being able to protect it by giving it Indestructible. I think is great in limited, but I doubt it's going to see much, if any, Standard play because we really don't see very many spells like this that black decks play. Next, we've got Stampeding Scurryfoot for a green mana. You get a mouse. That's a 1/1. It has an exhaust ability for 3 and a green mana. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then also create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So while I don't think this is Standard playable by any means, the fact that you can give it a +1/+1 counter and you get a 3/3 green elephant creature token might be good enough to consider in some type of decks out there. Certainly in limited, this is the kind of card I would want because in limited, I'm likely to be able to activate that exhaust ability, get that creature, get the Stampeding Scurryfoot up to 2/2. So under those circumstances, I'm definitely going to be playing this or liking this in a limited pool if I'm going to play green. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to be Standard playable. Next, we've got Fuel the Flames for 2 and a red mana. You get an instant, and Fuel the Flame deals 2 damage to each creature, and it cycles for 2. Now, on the surface, we've got other spells that do the exact same thing. We've got Pyroclasm that does it for 2 mana. So the fact that it's 3 it probably prevents it from seeing Standard play, but the one redeeming thing about it that I think might make it Standard playable in the right deck is that it happens at instant speed. So you can leave this up, You don't have to play it on your pyroclasm effect on your turn. You can wait, play it on your opponent's turn, and maybe hit more creatures that way because you played it on their turn. So I'm curious to see if this has any playability, simply because I have a feeling that we're going to see the format shift away from aggro strategies, because right now there's so much hate against aggro cards that I don't even think aggro as a strategy, probably for the foreseeable future, is going to be very good. All right. Those are our previews for Day 9 of Aetherdrift. I'll be back tomorrow with Day 10's previews, and we're almost to the end of the set, so I'll be starting to do top 10 list in the near future of our mythics, our rares, our uncommons, and possibly commons from the set, if I think there are enough that are going to be playable. So again, thanks for staying to the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Aetherdrift preview season and beyond. I'll see you in the next one.